a very warm welcome on behalf of Interfaith Glasgow to today's event, Anti-Pagan Prejudice, the Untold Story. Thank you so much for being with us today. So my name is Katie Sproul and I'm Interfaith Glasgow's project leader. I have with me colleagues and volunteers from Interfaith Glasgow. If you would like to give a wave to your camera, guys, just so people know who you are. I also have to give a shout out and thank you to my colleague Magdalene Lumpkin today, who will be doing our tech, which is not an easy job whatsoever. So thank you so much, Magdalene. For those of you who don't know, Interfaith Glasgow is a Scottish charity that promotes and facilitates friendship building, dialogue and cooperation between people from diverse faith and belief backgrounds. Through our dialogue work, we aim to provide an inclusive space for people to hear interfaith speakers present on a variety of themes relevant to the world we live in today, and to have their voices heard in group conversations too. So at today's event, we'll be focusing on discrimination and prejudice, in particular that which is experienced by the pagan community across Scotland and further afield. I'm delighted to welcome a fantastic panel of speakers from both the Scottish Pagan Federation and the Pagan Federation UK. The Pagan Federation was founded in 1971 and aims to support pagans to ensure that they have the same rights as the followers of other beliefs and religions. And the Scottish Pagan Federation was initially a district of the wider UK Federation, but became an independent organisation in 2006. The Scottish Pagan Federation's goals are to promote tolerance, respect and mutual understanding of paganism, to campaign for respect and equality alongside other religions in Scotland, to defend and protect pagans from discrimination, to provide accurate and factual information on modern paganism to the Scottish Government, non-government organisations, the media and more. So they're doing a lot of really great work across the country. So why today's event? Today's event was born after Interfaith Glasgow received a summary of results from the Scottish Pagan Federation's recent survey on pagan discrimination, results which were very alarming and worrying to hear. I won't go into much detail about these results now, as we'll be hearing from one of the lead investigators soon, but over 40% of pagans surveyed stated that they had faced direct discrimination because of their faith, and that's not okay. You may have heard words related to paganism before and maybe aren't quite sure what they mean, many of which have been given bad press by Hollywood and other forms of media. For example, characters which follow pagan faiths being written as villainous, with extreme inaccurate depictions of practices. Terms like witch and heathen, which are both belief systems in paganism, are used rather casually as insults in our society. And there's also certain symbols from their faiths, both holy and special, which get met with reactions of fear. Indeed, up until the early 1990s, if someone were to state their faith as pagan, they were at risk of losing their job, being investigated by social services, and even losing custody of their children. And to this day, many pagans don't feel comfortable admitting their faith. It's believed that pagans are less likely to report abuse than any other religions for fear of not being taken seriously. Religious discrimination and hatred exists in many forms, and many people here will have no doubt experienced it in one way or another. But as an interfaith community, we should stand in solidarity with each other. So we hope today's event will begin conversations with wider religious groups on the beliefs and practices of the pagan community and the experiences they face as they live their lives. So to give you a summary of today's afternoon's event, we will first hear from the National Interfaith Officer for the Scottish Pagan Federation, Linda Haggerston, and then the Scottish Pagan Federation's Presiding Officer, Stephen Haggerty, followed by a Q&A for them both. We will then hear from two members of the Scottish Pagan community, Bren McNeill and Chris Dumont, who will give a personal perspective of what it means for them to be pagan. And then finally from Sarah Kerr, who is the President of the Pagan Federation UK. So enough from me now, I've been talking a bit. Without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Linda Haggerston. Linda Haggerston is the Scottish Pagan Federation's National Interfaith Officer. She has been a pagan for many years, and her spiritual path is an eclectic mix of bardic drury, animism and Celtic Christianity. She is an English teacher, an ordained interfaith minister and a registered legal celebrant in Scotland. Linda is also an active member of the Glasgow LGBT+ Interfaith Network and currently the honorary LGBT+ chaplain for the University of Glasgow. So welcome, Linda, over to you. I'm just going to get my screen sharing ready for you as well.
Thank you, Katie. That's great. And I'll just say, next slide, please.
Okay, perfect.
I hope everyone can hear me all right. I seem to be having a little difficulty with my connection, so forgive the delays. Right. So I want to say, first of all, that I can only present information from my own perspective. Um, Paganism is an extremely diverse faith group. And what I'm going to try to do is just to present some general information to you. And then I encourage you to speak with individual pagans about their past. And the diversity will astound you and also give you some insight into how we probably have much in common with other faith paths. So you'll notice that on my first slide and the others, it has an asterisk after the title or the subtitles. And that's because, again, these are my thoughts and I cannot actually speak for everyone. So 4 of the major paths that we have in paganism are Druidry, Wicca, Heathenry, and Witchcraft. There are many others, but these are the ones that I'm most familiar with. And there are combinations which make them eclectic or blended paths. For example, you heard that I'm a Druid, and I also combine that with a little bit of witchcraft and a lot of animism, and also some shamanism, which I learned when I lived in North America. Now, we've got these 4 major paths, and they're all quite different. Again, there can be some overlap and also some unconnectedness. For example, somebody can be Wiccan and a witch. They're often mixed up, but Wiccans aren't witches. Witches can be Wiccans, but they are distinct. And I'm not going to go into that in detail because that is not my area of expertise. Now, some pagans do have a god or gods, but some of them are non-deist or non-theist. They don't follow a path that has a god. And that can be for many reasons, including that they have a rational approach. And by rational, I don't mean the opposite of irrational. I mean that it follows a non-magical path. Again, eclectic or blended, not quite the same thing. I'm eclectic, but I'm also blended in my beliefs. So I blend my Christianity, my Celtic Christianity, and my paganism into this wonderful little globe, this sphere of what makes me who I am. And they cannot be separated. It's also eclectic because it does pull in different areas. Now, my path is influenced by Celtic Christianity, but also Celtic legend and lore. As a Druid, I'm a bard, I'm a storyteller, I write songs, I write poetry, and I often include the Celtic wisdom in my stories. But as you will find out, there are other origins and influences from around the world. For example, you'll hear a bit about the Sumerian influence. There are people who follow a path that includes Egyptian lore, classical Greek or Roman, Norse, Anglo-Saxon. Different groups from the Mediterranean have influenced modern paganism, or I should say different cultures. And of course, the indigenous or Aboriginal influences, excuse me, indigenous or Aboriginal influences, yes, are strong. And yes, I'm going to say that we do have to be careful with appropriation of these living cultures. And we try our best to do that. But yes, that is on occasion misconstrued as pagans as being a bit appropriative of these things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Could you change the slide, Katie?
Yes, bear with me 2 seconds. There we go.
Cool, thanks. Commonalities between the different pagan paths. There tends to be a balance of feminine and masculine. So if you have a god and a goddess, there's a good chance that you are a pagan. There can be just one, or there can be a situation where one is more prominent in a person's life than the other. There are goddess temples, for example. This doesn't mean that the gods are excluded. It just means that the feminine has taken precedence as a way of reclaiming the goddess into our lives. Commonalities, again, we're centered on nature or the natural world, and we try to honor the earth in the best way that we can. Part of that is the interconnectedness with life, with all life, not just humanity, but with all the creatures, the plants, and the earth itself. We do often include ancestral and spatial sacredness. Many of us have oaths or ceremonies that honor the ancestors, whether they are blood or in spirit. And we do honor the land. That's the spatial sacredness. So we do have many sacred sites, and I know you've heard of some of them, such as Stonehenge and Avebury, and here in Scotland there are many as well. Templewood for one of them. And we have celebrations of cycles, and everyone does this differently. There are seasonal cycles, monthly cycles, the moon, and their life cycles. And we tend to follow these quite closely in our different ways. For example, I celebrate the Wheel of the Year. I celebrate 8 festivals each year as a Druid, but the names that I use for those festivals will be different than other pagans use. And finally, on Pagan Paths 2, we have isms. Animism. I am a bit of an animist. I believe that there is life, there is God, there is divinity in all things. Everything has a life source. So when a tree is cut, the life source goes into whatever that tree becomes. We take when we die, our life source goes back into the earth and can be reborn as another life source. So everything is alive. Polytheism, you have many gods and or goddesses. Pantheism, God is in everything, and everything is gone. And then again, non-theism. So that ism varies a lot amongst us. Shamanism. Some people say that there is no such thing as modern shamanism. Well, I think there is in indigenous communities. When I speak of myself being trained as a shaman, I speak of being trained by a Native American elder. And she promised me that I would say to people that I have been trained in shamanism, but I'm not a shaman in the same way she is. My focus is on talking to those who have crossed over into another world. Other people will practice herbalism, and so on. Reconstructionism and revivalism is important. You will hear from some folks who know about this better than myself, but as far as Druidry goes, yes, we have revived and reconstructed from ancient sources, or particularly the Roman and the word of mouth sources, to put together a modern Druidry as best we can. Lineage and initiation. Wiccans have a line of lineage, not through blood, but by teachers. The teachers are lineage based. So you'll have Gardnerian, you'll have Alexandrian, and so on. Those are the teachers. Both Druidry and Wicca have initiation. They're quite different. Druidry initiation is less, in my opinion, less formal than Wiccan initiation. And the ceremonies are beautiful, not unlike ordination in Christian churches, again, in my opinion. And finally, I want to mention some of the pagan symbols that you might have seen recently in the news, in the media, in a movie. You might have seen some folks wearing them on their chest when they are going out and invading the Capitol in the US in the name of Donald Trump. So I've just presented some pagan symbols here for you. There are many. Some of these are also magical tools or ceremonial devices. Druids, I put that first. These are in no order in particular. The awen is a symbol that Druids use, and it is breath. It is the creative breath, life force. I'm not going to go into great detail, but it is a very important symbol to me. It's a beautiful symbol. You might know that, again, that the goddess is very important. For some, it's the triple goddess that is extremely important. So you might see people wearing this symbol on a necklace or have it on their home. And sometimes you'll even see people wearing a crown with the triple goddess on it. The tree, again, Druids plant trees. It's a thing with us. Other pagans do it too. So the tree is the life of us all, the tree of life, the world tree. And you might recognize this from other faiths as well. The star, the pentagram, the 5 points. This is a very old symbol. The one I've put on there is, I think, from Greek. It's from a Greek medical book or an anatomical book. I can't remember which, so it's quite old. The hammer, the Norse hammer, the hammer of Thor. Okay, so you've seen that in movies. And that you see that around people's necks. And it's a very powerful symbol, not villainous, I can promise you. The spiral that takes many, many forms, the spiral of life, the spiral that connects us all, and the triple spiral or triskele. The elements, again, you see the star. There are 4 or 5 elements, depending upon who you speak with. And you'll find this in other faiths, including Chinese philosophy. And when we have a goddess, we have a god, the horned or antlered god. Again, this is one of the symbols for a particular god that is worshipped in paganism. The runes, I could go into detail on this all day. I read runes as a divination tool, a guidance for life, if you like. You've seen it in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. You've also seen it on the chests of certain races. I'm not going to go into detail on that. I find it very distressing that our symbols like this are misappropriated, abused, and used to preach hate. It's not unlike the burning of the cross, as one example. The hearth and cauldron, going back to something happier, the hearth and cauldron, hearth and home, and the cauldron are wonderful symbols for witches in particular. I use a cauldron and I absolutely love it. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail, but it takes away the negative parts of my life, and I can also use it to send blessings into the sky. The circle and the wheel. You'll see lots of wheels and lots of circles in paganism. Connectedness, uniting us all. The chalice and the athame, the masculine and the feminine together. You'll see this in wedding ceremonies. So when a couple is married, there's often on the altar a chalice and a athame, and when they come together, the couple is married and blessed, or hand-fasted and blessed. Right, thank you, Katie. And the last slide is simply some suggested readings. Professor Ronald Hutton, specifically on Druidry and witchcraft, his lectures are like no other. I highly recommend them. My friend Yvonne Abro, who has moved to Canada, has written many great and influential books on Wicca, and in particular LGBTQ plus paganism. Again, highly recommended. 2 of our own, Helen and Mark Woodsford Dean, who live in Orkney, they give spiritual tours of Orkney, and they've written a book, The Old Golden Land, which is fantastic. It covers the archaeology of of Orkney, as well as the spiritual aspect. And finally, I have to put in a plug for my friend David C. Gray, who is also known as Reverend David Gray, or the Punk Monk. He calls himself an Aspie, not my words. He's neurodiverse. He is also very much an interfaith minister. He practices both witchcraft and Christianity. He is a monk he's a Franciscan monk. And he's written a young adult novel full of detail, a wonderful story about a young girl who grows up in a witch family. It's about finding your path, and it's about the blending of faith. So again, all highly recommended. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for such an informative talk. It was really fantastic hearing all the different symbols and their meanings, because certainly a lot of people will have seen them in the media. So thank you, everything, just a great insight into the pagan faith and the different strands. So next, let me introduce Stephen Haggerty, who has been working on the Scottish Pagan Federation's Discrimination Survey and is here today to talk a little about the results and what they mean to the community. So Stephen, or Steffi Haggerty, is a presiding officer of the Scottish Pagan Federation. He sits on the board of the Pagan Heathen Symposium and is a prominent pagan rights activist. Steffi was the first pagan to be elected to the role of chair of a regional interfaith group in Scotland, which was Renfrewshire Interfaith. He speaks at pagan events across Scotland and is currently working with the curator of St Mungo's Museum of Religious Life and Art on a pagan faith display that will sit in their Scottish gallery. Steffi identifies a spiritual path as Chaldean or Sumerian. So a very warm welcome to you, Steffi. Over to you.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So a little bit about me. I think that's just pretty much been covered. I am the presiding officer of the Scottish Pagan Federation, and this discrimination survey. Let's start from the beginning. It just seems to be jumping away from me. That's weird. Okay. Apologies for this. My survey seems to be going crazy. That's bizarre.
If you maybe try just clicking manually on the slides instead of going into a slideshow, if it's not letting you do it in order, that might just be a good sort of quick fix solution.
Okay, so how to do that? Just from
if you go to
slide. See, when I do that, it just jumps through them like that, and they're gone.
If you come out of the slideshow and you just click on the bar on the side, you know, where it's got like 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And if you click on whatever slide you want, and then just that will bring it up in the center.
Okay.
You're already on the slide, so.
Yeah, so that's fine. So I'll try and minimize this then. Okay, so sorry about that. Hopefully you can edit that bit out. My slideshow seems to be having a life of its own just now. So I am the presiding officer of the Scottish Pagan Federation, and around 2018, I ran the 25th anniversary event of the Scottish Pagan Federation, the conference. And during that conference, actually, I spoke to a lot of pagans, and I started hearing some very worrying, what was the word for it? The chat on discrimination people were suffering. And then part of the 25th anniversary conference, we ran a series of community discussion panels, and they highlighted that there is actually a lot of discrimination going on, more than I first thought. So by late 2018, I was elected as the presiding officer of the Scottish Pagan Federation. And at that point, after what I had heard at the 25th anniversary conference, I decided that I was going to start a survey to work out exactly how much discrimination was going on. And I would create this survey as part of my 5-year plan for running the Pagan Federation. So by early 2019, I started collaborating with a social anthropologist for the University of Edinburgh on the first wording of the survey and what we wanted it to cover. And by late 2019, we had put the survey out for consultations to a series of larger pagan organisations, not just in Scotland, but across the UK. We put out for consultation to the Pagan Federation, England and Wales, to the Druid Network, to the Pagan Heathen Symposium, to Children of Artemis and Fellowship of Isis, and many other large pagan organisations. And they fed into what the questions would be, what we wanted to ask the pagan community, and what we wanted to get out of the survey. So by early 2020, I went to the Scottish Pagan Federation Council with cap in my hand, asking for some money to invest into launching the survey properly. And it went out live at the end of last year and at the beginning of this year. And we have so far had 500 responses. And given that we have around about 5,000 pagans in Scotland from what the last census was, this gives us a really good percentage of certainty that we understand what's going on the ground, because this is like not many surveys get 10% of an entire faith community in an entire country captured. So this gives us a good idea of what's really happening. Next slide. So the survey results. I think Katie touched on some of the survey results already, but we had reported that 40% of the people surveyed, Scottish pagans, who were the most who answered the questions, had said that 41.46%, if you want to go be accurate on this, had said they had been directly discriminated against because they're pagans. Over 60% of them said they knew someone in the Scottish community who had suffered direct discrimination. Over 40% of pagans said they felt actually anxious or depressed because of other people's attitudes in Scotland to their faith. Over 50% had said that they actually had felt they'd been made to feel ashamed by people's comments on their faith. Over 40% said they fear their children would be bullied or harassed in their children's schools, either by other parents or by school teachers or by other pupils, if people in that school knew their family were pagans. Almost 40% of pagans would be less likely to respond to report incidents of discrimination in the workplace because they're pagan, because they feel they just wouldn't be taken seriously. Over 60% of Scottish pagans have had members of other faith communities try and convert them. Over 70% have had other people say that they worship the devil. Over 60% of pagans in Scotland have been told to go to hell because of their faith. And over 90% of Scottish pagans feel paganism is treated a lot less seriously than other faith traditions. And the last one is many pagans believe, over 90%, that paganism should be at least touched on in non-denominational schools to help reduce the discrimination that they're facing. And I'll give you some of the comments we had in the surveys. So the comments we had were, some of them were quite harrowing. I'll read a few of them out. So my family was very aggressively against me when I came out the broom closet. And they mocked me when I didn't turn back in paganism. They mocked me and they still mock me. I have to keep my faith hidden as it would affect my job prospects. The level of ignorance surrounding pagan beliefs is surprising, as some believe we sacrifice animals or commit rape or we worship the devil. Although I have been verbally abused because of my faith, it seems worse now than it was 60 years ago. I work for the police, and if I revealed my faith, it would make my position untenable. My 6-year-old child was told her God doesn't exist. Only the Abrahamic God exists. I mean, we had a lot of comments actually back from children in schools, and the actual comments we had back from them were very worrying. I was an adult at the time, and my son's RE teacher told my boys I would go to hell when I died, and she would not acknowledge me if she spoke to any of the other parents' evenings. She would act as if I didn't exist. And due to this, I had to explain to my two very young, traumatized little boys that I wouldn't go to hell and I would be okay. My daughter was verbally abused over a period of time by her RE teacher. We've got a lot of comments back from children being bullied in RE because their parents are pagan, which is understandable why a lot of parents are actually worried about kids that the school teachers finding out they're pagan. Last summer I was attacked verbally for being pagan. I was shaken and had a panic attack because of it. This needs to stop. No one in modern 21st century Scotland should experience anything like this. That's just me reading out a few of the comments on your screen. And again, we've had a few comments recently on our surveys that are even a lot worse than that. We had one where a girl actually was walking back from school and she had a group of boys following her and throwing pieces of rubbish and litter at her. And we had another one where a young child was actually pinned against the wall. And there's a lot of issues going on. And I think we'll go for the last slide anyway. So what have we done about this? Well, the Scottish Pagan Federation has written formally to Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, as well as the Minister for Justice, Hamza Yousaf, and several other prominent MPs and MSPs. We've also written to the Director of Interfaith Scotland, the Executive Director of Edinburgh Interfaith Association, again, Interfaith Glasgow, which are wonderfully letting us have this event. And we have had initial responses back from the Scottish Government, and we can confirm that they have actually opened an official inquiry into this. And we're going to be working hand in hand with them to find solutions and to better strengthen pagan rights and recognition. And I'll finish off by saying, like, for too long, pagans have been an invisible faith community in Scotland, and a lot of us, have no choice but to simply live with the prejudice we get on a regular basis, as if it's something we should keep silent about as a cost for practicing our faith. And that's not acceptable. That should never be acceptable. And discrimination and prejudice should never be tolerated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steffi, for sharing those results. And some of those comments were just harrowing to listen to. I was sitting getting quite emotional. So thank you for raising awareness. And it's a very worthwhile survey that you're doing. So I had a question a little bit earlier on, so I'll start us off. And this is a question for Linda. Obviously, everyone's journey is different, but sometimes I struggle to explain the blend of paganism, witchcraft, and Christianity in my life to others. How would you explain yours and the intersection?
Yeah, this is a question I actually get asked a lot. And I always get excited talking about it. So hopefully it won't babble on. So how do you talk to people about being part of multiple religious belonging, to use a phrase that Rose Drew introduced me to, or blended faith? For me, they're not separate. Right, okay, as a pagan, there are many teachers. I mentioned my Native American elder teacher. That's just one. I also trained in Buddhism. So the Buddha is a teacher. Jesus is a teacher. Many of the prophets are teachers to me, and the poets like Rabia from Islam. The wisdom that has come into my life has come from many sources. So when I'm talking to people about what I believe, this is what I tell them. I say, think of a life, all the influences that come into your life from childhood. Do you just dump them as you go through life, or do you take them in and do you blend them, no matter what they are? Do you blend them? Sometimes, yes, you go bye-bye, but you often blend things, and sometimes you return to them. So for me, there was blending, but there's also returning and saying, yeah, I like this teaching of Jesus. Turn that table. Yeah, you know, I could go on about this all day. I just talk from my heart. How does it feel to you? How does it make you feel inside? What is good about it? That's what you can tell people.
Thank you so much, Linda. So there's a couple of curious questions. I think they've been put to the chat to everybody, but I'll read them out for you. So as a Celtic Christian, do you believe in Christ as your Redeemer? I'm not going to ask you all the questions because I think that we've got a couple more coming in directly, but we've also got how do you talk to the dead and do pagans have a concept of hell? So if you want to answer these three quite briefly, I think people are quite curious about your blended strands.
Right. Oh, goodness me. Right. Christ the Redeemer. I am a Celtic Christian, but I don't believe in Christ as a Redeemer. And I'm putting little quotes up there. I don't believe in Christ as a Savior or a Redeemer because for me, Christ is a teacher. Christ is a revolutionary teacher. And yes, a prophet who came along at the right time, or maybe the wrong time for him, came along at the right time to give us this wonderful message of love. So that's the Christ that I follow. We often say, Christ is my druid. Druid, teacher, lawgiver, so on. Talk to the dead. That one's complicated. You have to talk to me about that, I think, on a more personal note, because I'm not an exorcist. I don't do this like TV show, go ghost hunting thing. It's very specific. Yeah. Okay. Pagans with a concept of hell. Ooh, right. Some. Well, I can say some. Do I have a concept of hell? I don't have a concept of a hell separate from what we put ourselves through. No. But others might give you a different story.
Thank you so much, Linda, for answering
okay?
your series of questions. No, that was fantastic. I've got a question for both of you. I'll give you a talking break and I'll ask Steffi first. Are there any strands of paganism which have a particularly large following, and do you have a favourite pagan festival? So the first one may be more from an educational and the second one from a personal.
Well, the largest pagan paths, I would say, are possibly Druidry, Heathenry, and Wicca. That I would say that those are the three largest, and then there's all sorts of other ones that are out there. I myself am a Chaldean, so I follow the ancestral religions of the ancient Hebrews. So I'm very polytheistic, but polytheistic from a proto-Bible point of view. The first Chaldean was Abraham, and he formed the Abrahamic faith. So there's all sorts of flavors and paths in paganism that aren't just European. You know, there's ones from the East and the Near East and Mesopotamia and Egypt. I think that Linda touched on that before, but I don't know if that answers your question.
I think so. And do you have a favourite festival, favourite pagan festival?
Possibly the Duku festival, the Mesopotamian Duku. It's very much focused on ancestral, you know, on the Holy Mountain and on the ancestors under the Holy Mountain, and it's a wonderful. Actually, it's kind of focused also on Göbekli Tepe, which is, many people believe it comes from Göbekli Tepe, which was the first proto temple dating back to around 10,000 BC. And the Sumerian memory of that temple being built and buried. That's an interesting one.
Thank you. And Linda, do you have a favourite pagan festival?
Oh, that's so difficult. I have to say it's between Samhain and Imbolc. Again, I follow more of a Celtic path. And so we're talking about the first stirrings of spring, Imbolc or Imbolc. and Samhain, which is for many pagans a time of the new year, when we have the final harvest, and it seems like a dark time of year is coming upon us, but it also gives us time to reflect and connect with our ancestors. Again, ancestors, as Steffi mentioned, it's really important. So those two.
Lovely, thank you. So another question from the chat. When faced with a difficult or moral decision in your life, how do you approach it? They've said monotheistic believers usually pray. So I will ask both of you this, whoever wants to go first.
Prayer works just as well in all faiths, and from a polytheistic point of view, you can pray. You don't need to pray to one god. You have many gods to choose from, and goddesses to choose from, depending on what their role and function is.
Fantastic, thank you, Steffi. And Linda?
I agree with Steffi. For me, yes, prayer is extremely important. Yes, when the pandemic hit, I, of course, like many people, was hit with incredible, inconsolable grief. And no matter who I talked to, it wasn't enough. I needed something bigger than myself. So yes, I did on my altar have many different little figures and beings, including a tree. Yes. I just asked for guidance, and not just for myself, but for everyone, to help us get through.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you. One last question is about the survey. Has a survey of this kind been conducted anywhere else in this world, to your knowledge? And then also a follow-up question of what is known about pagan discrimination elsewhere? If you don't have survey results, maybe this is through personal stories and connections.
I'm not aware of something, certainly Scotland and in the UK and Europe wide, been done before. I know that we have had reports by other pagan federations of discrimination, and I know Sarah's going to talk a little bit about that as well when she comes on. So hopefully that'll answer that question for you. And we certainly know from some of the articles we've read, certainly academically, that there's a lot of discrimination out there. There was a shop, I think, was it a few years ago, that had fireworks put through its door and all that by local people because it was a pagan shop. That was down in England. And I think also they had their car attacked and things like that. So we know there's discrimination down south as well. Hopefully Sarah can touch on some of that.
Thank you, Steffi. Linda, do you have anything to add?
I'm going to defer to Steffi because he knows a bit more than I do, but I do know that there seems to be, from my experience, there seems to be a bit more pagan prejudice here in the UK in general. I lived in the US and Canada, and I encountered nothing like what has been described in this survey.
So next, I want to introduce a member of the Scottish pagan community, Chris Dumont. Chris is an earth-based eclectic animist and says he has followed this meandering, rambling path for a little over 30 years. He's a former environmental activist with a background in environmental biology and diagnostics. He's engaged in direct action and protests for both environmental and social justice causes. And he's also a committed home gardener, growing fruit, veg, herbs, and also raising chickens. Chris is going to tell us a little bit more about his personal story and his faith. And it's great to have you here with us, Chris.
Thank you. To touch on Linda's blended or eclectic, I come from a sort of traditional English hereditary witchcraft. Well, I was taught by a hereditary witch elder, but I also was a Dark Age reenactor for many years and was taught a bit by Goethe. So I draw from witchcraft and heathenry. But at core for me, it's always been about nature. It's always been about that link to the earth and finding out more about animism, that is the lens that I look at my, if you like, heathenry witchcraft is all looked at through an animist lens. So, what is animism? I'm aware of time, so I'll try and be brief. The best definition I've come across is in Dr. Graham Harvey's book, Animism, Respecting the Living World. In that, he says animism is the kind of knowledge that the earth is filled with both human and non-human persons. We can all kind of accept the personhood of humans. I think it's pretty uncontroversial to accept the personhood of more natural non-human persons. You know, we accept the personhood of whales. Whales, like humpbacks and that, changed their behavior in the 19th century as due to whaling. And there's culture in other beings, but even your pet dog, you know, your pet dog is that dog, it's not dog. Then you get into plants, fungal webs, that kind of thing. I mean, people can accept trees, landscape features, a mountain, a hill, a river, a forest, the life that flows through that, all the interactions in that life web. So personhood there. I think possibly the most misunderstood aspect of animism is probably things becoming persons. Now, there's a much cited example of an Ojibwe elder asked back in 1930 by Irving Hallowell, the anthropologist, so are all the stones alive? And apparently he looked out and said, yes, but not all of them. So one of the main examples of non-human persons, of things becoming persons that I have encountered is drums. Now, there's the cited example of the Banzanhole hut of the royal drums, but that is not my culture. You know, it's not my place to speak for that. But I hand drum, and within the UK and US drumming community that I am aware of, that I've interacted with and been part of, there's a strong animist thread. As an example, people who have many drums that they play, they speak of their drum family, and this is separate. If they're a drum instructor, it's separate from the drums they lend out. Some drums have names. Some drums, people speak about drums that are asking to be played, and people make offerings to certain drums. If you go to a drum circle, a lot of the time, there's drums in the middle of the circle that are free for everybody to use. And then there are drums that sit by the name, by the human chairs. So as you can see, some drums are persons and some drums are just drums, right? I'm trying to rush through. The second point that I want to touch on, that's, I think, a significant difference between more theistic paths. Rune Rasmussen, Dr. Rune Rasmussen, who runs the Nordic Animism platform, and Graham Harvey both touch on this. The world, speaking, I said, this is my perspective. Yeah, I can't speak for anyone else. But for my animism and for other people I've talked to, the world is messy. The world is not, you haven't got a divinely ordained, rigid system. The world is messy, and the world is built on interaction. If you look at the world around you, you look at pollinators and flowers. You look at birdsong and the competition. Trophic cascade. I mean, as an example, look at whales. Whales dive down to depth. They feed. They bring up, they come back up to the surface into the photic zone. They poo, massive poos. That fertilizes the photic zone. You get phytoplankton. Those phytoplankton are fed on. That produces more life. The phytoplankton photosynthesize. They draw down carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, and when those phytoplankton die, they take some of that carbon dioxide, they drop it down to the ocean bottom, and it's kept out of the atmosphere for, you know, kind of pretty, not quite geological time, but for a long time.
Chris, just to let you know, sorry to interrupt, that's your 2-minute mark.
Okay. These interactions build the world, right? So the world is built on interaction. Now, this carries over into personal spiritual practice. If you, for me, my animism is about building relationships with the persons around me. So, you know, the hill at the back has presence. So, you know, I go out. So it's also about engaging with the seasons, engaging with the seasonal cycle. It's engaging with life. This puts you back into it as it empowers you. It puts you back into it as a participant, not just a passive observer. Right, I've got to move on. Time. We're all little lives, part of the big life. Yeah, when you look at Lovelock's Gaia theory, all those interactions in the life web, how life maintains and manages all those interactions, manage the conditions for life. Yeah. Also look at Dr. Lynn Margulis and her sort of idea that life was seeded onto Earth via comets. So we are part of a living web, the life web, part of a universe that is wider, right? I'm rushing to conclude. We face the 6th extinction. We face the unfolding climate crisis. This is a threat to our very existence and that of many other beings within the life web. A big driver of that is our lifestyles in the industrialized world. You know, we want our cars, we want our lawnmowers, we want everything. To change our actions, we have to change our minds first. Animism and other earth-based paths offer a way to do that. If you've built relationship with the earth, with your local landscape, with your river, the trees, you are more likely to stand up and take action. You know, you are also more likely to look at your own lifestyle and do something. As some heathens say, we are our deeds. All our words, all our actions have consequence. Yeah. So, you know, if we change our lifestyles, we talk, we build community, and that becomes part of a broader social movement.
Chris, so, just to let you know, sorry to interrupt, that's your time just coming to an end.
Right. So that's how I see animism having a role in the present. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing environmentalism into it. It shows just how interconnected it is. It was a pleasure to have you speaking, Chris, so thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will also be telling us a little bit more about what his faith means and what his faith means to him. So let me introduce Bren McNeil. Bren McNeil has been a part of the pagan community for 20 years and has volunteered with the Scottish Pagan Federation since 2012. He generally identifies as an eclectic pagan, though mostly finds himself somewhere between a religio romana and heathenry. Over the last 2 years, he's been a volunteer guide at the Govan Stones, a collection of Viking and medieval burial stones housed in Govan Old Church. So welcome, Bryn.
Hi, can you hear me now? Yeah. So you kind of covered the main points of my talk there in the introduction. Let me just slide my script over. Personally, I feel that today I'm representing the people who are lucky enough not to suffer any discrimination, as opposed to those of many who sadly are. So I'm definitely in that other 60%. As Steffi was saying, the figures are surprising, even shocking. And I know from experience, I knew a school teacher who had issues and ended up taking early retirement. And in more recent years, a friend's daughter was having problems in school. And in her case, it was the teacher, not the kids. So I definitely understand there's lots of levels of discrimination out there. My own pagan path has evolved from an interest in Celtic through ancient Rome to the Norse tradition. So I've got a lot of gods to think about, a lot of gods to pray to. I could have rituals every night of the year because there's so many gods to choose from. That would be fun. It doesn't quite work out like that in real life, sadly. My interest originally stems from mythology and folk tales, which run a lot through the Celtic side of things. And then mythology takes me to ancient Rome. And in the last couple of years, as mentioned in the introduction there, I volunteer at the Govan Stones, which is a Viking site, but there's little Viking stuff there. So when I'm doing research, I've got 1,500 years to play with, and all of the internet I can handle. And hopefully we'll reopen and have more visitors, and all my research will actually be able to be shared. It's an old Church of Scotland church. As a child, I was born Roman Catholic. So I'm a pagan in a Church of Scotland church, interacting with both the staff and volunteers and all the wonderful visitors we get. You don't know who or where they're from, what their background is, what their faith is. So I kind of see that my little volunteer job is a little bit interfaith in its own way. Let's see. I've kind of lost my thread here, but I think there's probably, if there's any more I can add, I could probably best answer it in the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you so much, Bryn. Then it was really wonderful to hear from you, and wonderful to hear all your different paths and how they interconnect. I would love to introduce Sarah Kerr. Sarah Kerr is the president of the Pagan Federation, the UK, and she is a healer and a witch and has followed an eclectic pagan path for 25 years. She believes deeply that everyone should be able to practice their faith, whatever that is, without prejudice, no matter what their path, age, race, gender, sexuality, or life circumstances be. She will be reflecting on what we've heard so far, talking a little bit about her own faith and giving her insights from a wider UK perspective. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Sarah.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I've been invited to speak about pagan discrimination. It's a subject that's very close to my heart. As a pagan myself, I've faced discrimination because of my beliefs over the course of my life. I know people who have suffered worse, but I've still been a victim of it at times. As you'll have heard from lots of the other speakers, my own set of beliefs are very personal to me. You'll have heard the word eclectic in my bio there, so and I think it's been mentioned a few times today. So my path is quite complicated. I started in Wicca and traversed through Celtic traditions, a bit of esotericism, and Norse heathenry as well. So it's quite an eclectic mix. I bring those things together, the things that speak to me, to my soul, to my core beliefs, I suppose, and then I bring those things to my practice. I also bring them into my work as a healer, where I use those things as well that I've learned to help bring, I suppose, spiritual peace to other people, where they might not be able to find it in the outside world. So during the almost 25 years that I've been following a pagan path, I've been mocked, I've been teased, I've been picked on, I've been scared and worried to reveal my beliefs to others, you know, in case of being on the receiving end of that kind of behaviour, or in some cases, my children being on the receiving end of that kind of behaviour because their mother believes a certain thing. It's certainly been a thing for my younger son with his primary school. They were reading a book about witches, and the witch in the story is incredibly evil with warts on her nose, and she's a bad guy. And of course, he came home and said, "But Mummy's a witch. Does that mean she's a bad guy?" So it has an impact on every area of our lives. My own mother, for example, practicing pagan witch in the early 1970s, she suffered all of that and a lot more, to be fair. And at one point, she even had a brick thrown through her window in the middle of the night with a note threatening to hurt her on it because of her beliefs. She really struggled to find mentors and friends for help and support in her beliefs until about the mid-1990s, because everyone who followed a pagan path kind of hid themselves from the world. You know, they were all very fearful, and you couldn't be very open about those kinds of things. So meeting people that were of a like mind that you could connect with and create a community with was a bit rare and a bit few and far between. Even now at her job, she feels she can't be open about her beliefs because she might lose her position. Although that is eased now because she's got a community that she can connect with at last, which is always a good thing. The stories that I've heard while working with the Pagan Federation, you know, mirror my own experiences, and there are some that are a lot worse. In the last year alone, we as an organisation have helped deal with 23 advocacy cases. That's one a fortnight, and that's only the ones that we know about. There are bound to be a lot more than that. And those cases can include anything from a workplace blocking access to the Pagan Federation website because it was deemed unsafe, despite websites such as the Church of England's remaining easily accessible to them, to social services still using pagan beliefs as a reason to attempt to remove children from their parents, despite no other evidence that they're unsuitable caregivers. So, you know, this really does span every area of people's lives. And it's not just that kind of discrimination that we fight either. The press and media, at the very least, mock us, and at the worst, accuse us of some of the worst kinds of crimes. There was an article in The Sun last year as I stepped up to take the presidency. You know, they were accusing us of bestiality, and they said it was a joke, but it isn't a joke to us. It's a major crime, and one that none of us are guilty of. So, you know, we take on the press, we take on the media. And generally, you know, we're a good bunch of people, so we really don't deserve that. And I've dealt with, I don't know, at least half a dozen problematic publications, generally online press, over the last 6 months alone. And that doesn't even begin to touch on what goes on in film and TV. I would really like to say that the results of the Scottish Pagan Federation survey are a surprise to me, but unfortunately I can't. What they do is confirm that we've still got a really long way to go in changing the misconceptions and the stereotypes that are held by large numbers of people in the general population. And that isn't something that's limited to England and Scotland either. You know, for example, when the Oxford English Dictionary has the definition of witch as someone who is evil and who commits evil acts, how do you start to overcome that prejudice, those misconceptions, those stereotypes? And the UN, we've just supported a project by the United Nations. They're currently working on a project that's aimed at stopping the range of horrendous crimes that are committed in the name of stopping witchcraft because of these stereotypes, because of the beliefs that people have about us, which are wholly untrue. You know, there are a huge amount of cases of things like child abuse, elder abuse out there, that are committed because people are disabled, and but their own beliefs lead them to believe that these people are guilty of being witches or demons when they're simply not. They need help, and you know, medical help or mental health help or something similar. So really it's a worldwide problem. Pagans and witches are generally cast as the bad guys, despite the fact that, as I know myself from my own community, most often they're valuable, willing contributors to their communities. And they work in some of the most caring professions. Some of my friends are nurses, some are lawyers, some are occupational therapists, some are teachers. You know, they really want to do their best by the world. I know that we're not alone in this kind of discrimination. There are plenty of other faiths and beliefs out there that are just as misunderstood as paganism, if not more so in some cases. But I also believe that, you know, all religions and faiths have their extremists, and paganism, pagan paths are no different to that. But the persecution of pagans has been ongoing for millennia, and it hasn't stopped. It's about a huge swathes of a population getting tarred with a brush that really needs to be painted differently. I really wholeheartedly wish that we could wave a magic wand, pun intended, and solve the problem overnight for us all. But in reality, that's just not possible. What it is taking, what I'm finding is the solution is hard work, talking to people, educating them so that they can understand that we're generally good people, helping them to understand our beliefs and practices instead of, you know, not understanding, so therefore mocking them or fearing them. What I do believe as well, though, is that it will be a shorter journey if we can come together with people of other faiths who are willing to listen and learn. Hands up, we can be just as bad at that as other communities. But, you know, we want to get better at that. The solution lies in finding our similarities as human beings, being there for each other, despite the different traditions and paths that we walk. We really have to find ways to be allies if we're going to fix this, if we're going to make it better. We need to find the things that we share in common so that we can navigate our differences. And I really believe if we can find the route to that, then we have the answer to stopping discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for your word. So a question from the chat is there a social control aspect to paganism, as it can be seen in a lot of theistic religious schools? So I'm not sure if anybody wants to take that question on.
I think that one of the, for me, you know, personally, one of the joys of being pagan is that there isn't a scripture. There isn't a, you know, you have to make your own path, you know, decide on your own ethics. You have to, you know, do what you know, it is, there is a freedom in that. So I don't think there's a, so, you know, to my mind, there isn't that social control aspect that I saw when, you know, when I was being raised Christian or Mormon, you know, I didn't see that when I became pagan.
I think I'll echo what Chris said there. I think, you know, the pagan community works very differently in that there's a great deal of personal responsibility on an individual to follow a right path, to make sure that you have a set of morals and ethics that guide you along the way, and your pagan practice, whatever that may be, takes a part in that. I think the brilliance in the pagan community is that for each person it's brilliant, it's different. You know, you can put 10 pagans in a room and you'll get 100 different answers about what their path means to them. So I think there isn't a social control as there is, you know, a thing that joins us together, as in a document or a scripture or you know, a prescribed way of doing things. But there is in that we share that sense of personal responsibility, and I think for me that's one of the things that drew me to it, was the weight on personal responsibility, was the fact that I had to examine myself and my morals constantly to make sure that I was holding to the beliefs that I held dear.
Thank you so much. Bren, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I would just echo everything that Chris and Sarah have just said.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions for Chris on animism that have come through. So the first one is, do you see animism as based on the cycle of life and each stage being a form of life? And a follow-up question of, is animism exclusive to the pagan faith?
My animism is very much based on the seasonal cycle, and I'm earth-based, so for me it's very much about that. If you mean that cycle, or do you mean the kind of the progression through life in terms of aging?
I think the question was the latter.
Okay. I don't know. My animism is very much based on the seasonal cycle.
Okay, and the follow-up question was, is animism exclusive to the pagan faith traditions?
I don't think so, because I think in some cultures you have very animist elements within some other faiths. For example, I've seen some writing on animism within Buddhism, or animism within forms of Christianity. And also when you've had colonialism and colonization, some of those kind of animist elements survive under, you know, the pressure of the colonial kind of overculture.
Thank you so much for answering those questions. Another one that I've received is someone of the Jewish faith, I know there can be animosity between different factions of Judaism, and what is the right way to practice? Is there any similar problems within with this in paganism, particularly when people choose to blend their practices? I see nodding.
Yes, this is something that happens an awful lot, and you know, it's not exclusive to paganism, as they say. You know, this happens within different branches of different faiths, because these are very personal things to us. So they make sense to us, and it's hard sometimes to understand why they might not make sense to someone else. So yes, it does exist very definitely, and it's something that some people can overcome, and it's something that some people struggle with. So
yeah, I've seen it through Reconstructionist particularly I've seen it within heathenry, Reconstructionist heathens, and I've seen it between Reconstructionist heathens and Wiccans over, for example, Eostra and the dating of Eostra and the use of Ostara as a Wiccan name for the spring equinox, or Letha as a name for the summer solstice, as opposed to a couple of months, maybe 3 months, depending on the moon after the winter solstice, in the Anglo-Saxon calendar. So I've seen that. You've also got the obvious issue of Odinism within heathenry and the kind of racist element there, and their belief as opposed to the more general, widely accepted, inclusive belief system within heathenry.
Thank you. Bren, would you like to add anything?
Not really. I think these guys have covered everything I could say.
That's okay, not a problem at all. There will be plenty of time to have further discussions on these topics in the breakout rooms, which due to time, I'm conscious of time, I'm going to just start to introduce now. So thank you, Chris, Sarah and Bren, for answering these questions and for all of your wonderfully informative talks.